A very good afternoon to all. This is Dr. Beena Gandhi Deori, Deputy Director Research, SAARC Cultural Centre, Sri Lanka. On behalf of SCC, I welcome you all to this online forum, remembering the 20th century South Asian women in culture. 20th century in South Asia was a transformative period for women. There were social reform movements happening. The world has seen world wars, and women played a very important, a very significant role in these movements and shaped the history throughout the 20th century. So this online event aims to celebrate and recognize the contributions of 5 remarkable women across South Asia. So we have taken Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, who shaped the cultural and intellectual landscape of South Asia during the transformative 20th in around late 19th to 20th century. This forum will feature 5 eminent speakers from across South Asia who will shed light on the extraordinary achievements of these remarkable women. We have speakers we have Dr. Sangita Rayamajhi from Nepal, Dr. Nabiha Fatima from Pakistan, Dr. Kumud Bhansali from India, Jinat Ara Haque from Bangladesh, and Irushi Tennekoon from Sri Lanka. I welcome all the speakers once again. Each speaker will be given 15 minutes, and at the end of the presentation, we will have the Q&A. I'm extremely glad to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Sangita Rayamajhi, a senior professor at the Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu, Nepal. She is the first woman in Nepal to get her PhD in English literature. She is also the recipient of many prestigious scholarships, namely the National Endowment for the Humanities, a Fulbright Scholarship, and Scholar Rescue Scholarship. So she has also authored many books. At present, she is a visiting faculty at the Asian University for Women. She's also the director of the Center for Leadership and Professional Development. And this afternoon, she will share her insights on the life and works of Parijat, who is a very well-known literary figure from Nepal. So thank you, Dr. Rayamajhi. Please proceed with your lecture.
Good evening, Dr. Beena, Deputy Director, SAARC Cultural Centre, and good evening, my fellow panelists, and all those who are zooming in to be with us this evening. So thank you very much, the SAARC Secretariat and Dr. Beena, for including me in your panel. I greatly appreciate it. So my paper, right now, I'm from Nepal, as Dr. Beena said, and right now I'm in Bangladesh, Asian University for Women in Chittagong. So I'm speaking from my office in Chittagong. Okay, so the title of my paper is Parijat, Going Beyond the Pages of Literature. So we are going to talk about the cultural landscape of the time and the women who were posited on this landscape. So we have to remember this is the 1960s Nepal. Looking at the literary history of South Asian women, that is again 1960s, we see that they are molded in a certain stereotypical fashion. They are presented or looked upon as being weak, meek, and docile. It is evident that women were denied public spaces, a forum in which to make themselves heard. They had limited power within homes and society. Yet women left behind them the impression of their presence, especially in the form of poetry and oral folk tales, or what is today documented as folk literature. The art of literary writing has been predominantly very male-centered through the years, and that tradition has continued to the present times. In the literatures written by men, women have occupied center stage but have embodied roles where they have been relegated to the kitchen, drawing room, or bedroom as passive receivers and not as active agents of change. When women first emerged in the literary arena as writers in their respective geographical locales, they sought an identity in self expression and resistance. Women's writings, therefore, started off only as a growing subculture. In Nepal, documented records reveal that Nepali literature, primarily poetry written by women, started in the first decades of the 19th century. Bhakti songs were written and sung only as late as 1919. Most of the regional songs in both India and Nepal draw from these Bhakti songs. Yogmaya was one such Bhakti poet, an ascetic of the late 19th century. She was a childhood widow who went to India and returned to Nepal after 30 years with her daughter. She is considered the first female activist of Nepal. Leela Luitel, one of the writers, explains how Yogmaya's feelings were depicted vividly in such songs, but were only much later written and published in a book called Sarvartha Yogbani, that is Universal Voice of Yogmaya, by her daughter Nayankala in 1933. Her themes were primarily about class and caste discrimination, the sati system, slavery, bribery, and other social perversions. She also spoke out against the administrative system prevalent at that time. Several editions of her books were burnt. During this period, other poets such as Lavanyamani Devi, Swarna Kumari Birahini, and Nalini Devi had their poems published in the newspaper Raj Bhakti. Normally, the Bhakti songs did not have much to say about the political situation within the country, instead, presenting the rich details of domestic responsibilities and the shared aspirations of women. Those songs were also the basis for much of the folk literature that was being handed down through the generations. Even though women started writing much earlier, it was only after 1950 that short stories, novels, poetry, and essays written by them began to be published and read in Nepal. Even then, women did not emerge as literary critics or playwrights until the late 20th century. There had been no documentation of any research work conducted on Nepali literature. Many female writers' works were first published in weekly newspapers. When Sashikala Sharma wrote a short story called Cine Jagat, that is Film World, it was first published in the newspaper Jagrati. Similarly, Prema Shah's short story Pratikriya, which means response, in 1963, and Gita Keshri's Aparadhiko, who is the culprit, in 1966, were first published in local newspapers, Sharda and Arunodaya, respectively. Gita Keshri's short stories are primarily about issues prevalent in society, such as poverty, hunger, and family lives. That is, they are stories about social realism. Prema Shah, on the other hand, focuses on female sexuality and eroticism. Bishnu Kumari Waiba, now I'm getting to Parijat, who wrote under the pen name of Parijat, was a leading literary figure in the 60s and 70s. Two of her popular writings are her novel Sirish Ko Phool, The Blue Mimosa, and a short story Mero Na Janmiyeko Chhora, The Son Not Born to Me. Her works can be divided into two time periods for easier reference. In the earlier period of her fiction writing, she focused on nihilism, sex, and sexual perversions, while in her later works, she became more progressive and drew on Marxist philosophy. One could say her works are a landmark in the literary history of Nepal. In the immediate past of Parijat's time, literatures portrayed women at the center of the family structure, at least performing managerial roles, if not cooking, cleaning, etc. From Parijat's time to the present day, Literature of and by women are narratives of self-expression, protest, defiance, and negation through explicit portrayals of the body, expressions of the body language, and language itself. Thus, women in literature have recast the roles of women in society. That is, after Parijat or since the time of Parijat. Here, I would like to draw an almost parallel similarity between Sakambari and Jane Austen's character Marian in Sense and Sensibility, which was published in 1811. And you have to remember Parijat's Sirish Kapul was published in 1964. The central woman character Sakambari, Abari of Sirish Kapul, as is known to be a very strong-headed, confident woman who speaks up what she feels and thinks. She smokes openly. Remember, it's the 1960s. She makes fun of Suyuk Bir, the guy who wants to marry her, says he's too old, as did Marian of Sense and Sensibility say of Colonel Brandon. Her stance can be a rebellion against the stereotype of women and womanhood. She dies, Sakambari, she dies denying Suyog Bir his desire of marrying her. Bari does not fit into the conventional realities of the 60s and 70s. The conventional space, you could say, or reality of 60s and 70s. And so Parijat is forced to bring an end to Bari. That smart, futuristic girl has no place in the society of that time. Similarly, more than a century before Parijat's time, Jane Austen had either to transform and subdue Marian into an image of her sister Eleanor or get rid of Marian. So Marian was expressive, showed her emotions, expressed her wishes without hesitation, made fun of Colonel Brandon who wanted to marry her, and she refused to marry him because he was too old. He was 34. Girls like Marian and Bari would never fit into their social spaces. In fact, the society, the readers would never accept such characters. While Austen transforms Marian, in the end she marries Brandon. Parijat chooses to let Bari die. Mujura in Sirish Kapul, who is sister to Sakambari, is like Eleanor, embodying all the manifestations of the feminine. Marian, on the other hand, is Sakambari, strong, rebellious, and outspoken. Sakambari is very strong-willed. At one point, she says, I don't want to be confined within the walls of marriage. I seek freedom, not chains. Not chains, page 45. Sakambari defies societal expectations and refuses to get married. In fact, she's transcending patriarchal norms when she says, marriage is a prison for the soul, a cage for the spirit. 87. We see how Sakambari disrupts the gender norms of the Nepali society by a confident stance and exposes the constructed nature of gender expectations. When she says, I will not play the part they have written for me. I will write my own script. Page 138. In a clarion call for women writers of the time, she challenges the oppressive structures created by the intersection of gender and societal norms. Her rejection of marriage is a personal rebellion, a microcosm of a larger oppressive societal structure. Parijat was never a feminist. Her focus was on women, though. She portrays the women characters in a way she experienced them in the society. In her other works like Tiuri Ko Phool, Another Flower, she writes about the violence perpetrated against the female body, the alienation of the individual from the body. But my focus here is on the rebellious character able to take a decision for herself, a woman who has agency. Sirish Kapul is definitely a critique of the societal norms, the patriarchal assumptions, and the interconnectedness between a woman and nature, which is nuanced by the title of the flower, Sirish Kapul. Like a Sirish tree, I will bloom despite the odds. So this interconnectedness between man woman, and nature makes me evoke another writer, a male, Bisheswar Prasad Koirala, B.P. Koirala, in his Sumniman, which was also written at the same time, 1964. Koirala celebrates the female body. He connects Sumnima's nudity with nature and earth. Sumnima is a Kirat girl, an ethnic woman. She's the epitome of nature and the natural. She's ethereal. She's like the wisp of the wind. Koirala derides the Brahmin boy Somdatta, who loves Sumnima but is besotted with his farcical rituals, which stop him from attaining happiness on earth. He thinks austerity and ritualistic life will help to get him salvation. He loves Sumnima, but is unable to get out of the shackles of patriarchal Brahmin falsity. He remains unhappy, his unrequited love a constant. This male writer has so beautifully celebrated the female body. In fact, he destabilizes the dual structures perpetrated by patriarchy: man, woman, masculine, feminine, culture, nature, and all based on hierarchical gender norms. In this, there's no subordination. It's nature and culture, masculine and the feminine, all juxtaposed. So I'm coming towards the end. Sakambari is a powerful critique of the subordination of women. Patriarchy's powerful role limits the performance of a woman. Performance, as advocated by Judith Butler, the performance of the body is what we are. But in the Kirat community, there's no subordination, no societal authority that limits the performance of Sumnima's body. But Bari's performance in Sirishko Ful is one of resilience, autonomy, dignity, and confidence in a face of in the face of systemic oppression. But both are the women of the 60s. We see how in the cultural space of the 60s and 70s, while B.P. Koirala celebrates the woman, portrays Sumnima in the image of nature and the natural. For Parijat too, the strong woman Bari is a flower which blossoms and falls according to her own will. So I quote this: it, that is the flower, births for itself, flowers for itself, and falls as if accepting that it has to die, whether it fights with the bee or not. Why should it fall being wounded by a bee? It falls for itself. It falls by its own will. So, therefore, this Bari or Sakambari is Parijat's Bari of the 1960s Nepal. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you, Dr. Sangita Rayamajhi. Now, let me invite the second speaker, Dr. Nabiha Fatima. Dr. Nabiha Fatima is an assistant professor in the Department of Social Sciences at the Lahore School of Economics. She holds a PhD, MPhil in sociology and master's in mass communication. With extensive teaching experience at leading institutions, she has designed courses in sociology, anthropology, development studies, virtual media, and gender studies. Mentored students in research on social responsibility and community service. Beyond academia, she has worked with UNICEF, Pachan Foundation, and USAID on child rights, public health, and media's role in social change. As a qualitative research analyst for UNICEF, she contributed to a nationwide study on maternal and child health care. She has also written to Dawn, The News, and Daily Times, and appeared as an analyst in BBC documentaries. Her work continues to shape discussions on gender equality, media ethics, and social justice in Pakistan and beyond. Dr. Nabiha, over to you.
Good afternoon. Okay, so the topic, the celebrity which I am sharing today is Madam Noor Jahan. She's titled as the Queen of Melody over subcontinent. So I am going to start with a brief short introduction about her life history that, from the date of birth and the year of birth, it is not accurately documented as I had seen in the from the academic references. So from 1920 She's born in a pre-partition India, 1920, and she started her career as a child in the street theatre. And initially, she started with the theatrical company, which is Dr. Beena. Can you please check for the slide? And she started her career as with the theatre and those activities as a singer. Now, the very interesting part is that at that time, when she started her career as a child, as a singer, she was a 6-year-old, and as a 6-year-old singer, she started singing several songs for those street theaters and those small dramatic theatrical activities. And one of her songs, which she sang at the age of 8, which is very famously known across the both sides of the border, that gained immense popularity. So when we are coming ahead with that kind of freedom, which started at such a young age, so Noor Jahan continued singing, and somewhere there she started Dewan Ki Theatre, and from the Dewan Ki Theatre, okay, so when she shifted towards the Dewan Ki Theatre, and from there onwards, so Noor Jahan, the baby Noor Jahan, she was titled the baby Noor Jahan. There are certain pictures which I have shared in this, and yes. So the baby Noor Jahan, her name was originally Allah Vasai, and the name Noor Jahan was adopted for a theatrical and the stage performances. And at that young age, she was titled as a bloating paper because she would memorize everything which was being told to her. So she didn't need to read, or she wasn't taking a lot of time in learning all those things. That was a time when, until today, in India or Pakistan, it's a very highly patriarchal society. So you can well imagine, at that time, we are talking about pre-partition India, the British India, and the patriarchal structure, and especially when it comes to the entertainment industry and all that. She was coming from a very humble background, and this photo is circa 1935. And one of her, few of her songs became massively popular, and she was at a very young age. So in the entertainment industry, being a child actually wasn't seen as a very successful career. So she was, from a very young age, she was made to dress up and to look like, a fully grown up woman, and to start singing those songs and to start acting for those small little roles. And that was a time when she started learning. Her organic journey began. The reason that I'm starting from this early time period, that very short after that, I think when she was in the teens, and she was able to get the role in Khandan, which was a series, which was a cinematic movie, and the movie was although became a super hit, but somehow the movie was also known to be controversial. For example, it was being criticized for that they openly showed the romance. So that was a time when singing and talking about love or showing the romance, it really had to come under a lot of layers. So I think for me, the reason I picked up Madame Noor Jahan, because I found her that from a very young age, unknowingly and unconsciously, she has been calling out all those gender stereotypes. She, as a woman, as a girl, as a little child, she has been climbing up, and she has been part of the entertainment industry as a singer, as an artist, and how she unlayered all those gender stereotypes. So when she started this the movie and the first song, and it became famous, and then the Khandan, she acted, and she was a playback singer as well. So she was one of those very few people who were acting in both the genres of acting and were a playback singer as well. And if you see the next slide, this is the clip from the movie Khandan where she is with the Indian actor Pran. Now, this makes her a very unique 20th century artist from India or Pakistan. Why? Because she has also worked before the partition with all those leading actors and actresses. And then after shifting to Pakistan, after the partition, she has also worked. So that made her appeal to be very universal. That makes her, her appeal to be across the border. And that we see that, which I found to be very close to the spirit of SAARC, which talks about that how in many ways, through our human values, through our cultural values, we are very much united into that sense. Noor Jahan, somewhere, in that sense, she is closer to that. A lot of things across the border, the cultural ambassador, 1947, eventually she shifted to Pakistan. And in 1951, she starred before the partition in a movie Jugnu with an India very well known actor, Dalip Kumar. And although this movie was again highly criticized for the fact that it showed a college romance, and it was criticized that it is shown that the girls and the boys, they just go to the college. One of the reviewers wrote it to seek only for the hunt of the sex and the love. The movie crossed 5 million US dollars at that time. So it was the highest grossing Indian movie, and that gained immense popularity. Now in 1951, Noor Jahan became, after the partition, when she shifted to Pakistan, she became the first female woman in entire Pakistan to be the director. So she directed a film that was with the Santosh Kumar. And in 1958, then she became part of the movie Anarkali. Anarkali is one of the legendary roles which are part of the Indo-Pak tradition that's related with Mughal Azam. And when she became part of that Anarkali movie, then again she sang in the songs, and all those songs, they became legendary popular. When we are talking about the movie Anarkali, and at the time, afterwards, this Noor Jahan was also going through a lot of personal crisis, and she was going through the child custody battles of her children. That was the same time when she became a partner in one of the studios in Lahore, Shah Noor Studio. I think it was one of the main studios in Pakistan, the film studio. Shah was named after her husband, and Noor is Noor Jahan. She was the partner in the Shah Noor Studios. Can you please? And then the Qawwali culture, which is from the subcontinent, and if few of you have watched how the Qawwali is, so it's a group of men who sit together, and they sing a Sufi song, and they sit it together, and then they say, and the genre is that there is one lead singer, and then the rest of them are like a playback singer. But she was the one who became the first female Qawwal for the movie Jinat in 1945. I think in that era, that was a time when these were the women who, when there was no social media, and there was no, those words were not there in the language. When we talk about the misogyny, patriarchy, embedded hegemonic control, that was a time, I think it requires a lot of strength and empowerment for a woman to come up in that industry to be the first director, to be the first female Qawwal in the movie, and to be working in all the genres, which is singing and the acting. She was a mother of 4 at that time. And then simultaneously at the time, she was fighting the battle in the court for the custody of children, because she was going through a divorce. I unfortunately, when I was searching for the research material for Madam Noor Jahan, what I figured out that when we talk about misogyny, and when we talk about the hate for the women, I think it is something which is still very much there, because unfortunately, there were biographies, those so-called biographies which were written about the Noor Jahan, Madam Noor Jahan, and they were not focused on her achievements in her singing career or in acting career, or about how she broke the stereotypes, but they were more about her personal life. They were more about her character assassination. They were more about picking up, the loose corners from her life. And what I could see that those tactics were used to gain cheap popularity, or that was, maybe the yellow journalism, whatever we may call it. But in response to all of that, I was going through those history and those archives. None of the time she wasted her time and energy in answering to those people, and she kept on continuing her career trajectory. So, and she crafted her stardom, an iconic style, without surrendering. Because in those eras, if we talk about Pakistan, especially after we shifted to Pakistan, so there was this Islamization era that was going on, and gradually, the radicalization era was there. And we are not living in, the era of social media where there is an entire team that crafts or manufactures the image. She herself organically and, and wholesome, she crafted her own stardom, her own glamour. When we move to the next slide, if you look at her, so, nowhere there, the genre of art, acting and singing, and then she received multiple awards from Pakistan. She's at the time, she was a singer who sang more than 10,000 songs from Pakistan and received, I think, the maximum number of award 15 Nigar Award, the Presidential Award, another award, and then the Millennium Singer Award, the Fakhre Pakistan Award by the Pakistan Armed Forces. This is her credit as a singer, as an artist. What makes her special? Why we are celebrating her today in the SAARC? Because in 1980s, when Pakistan was ruled by a military dictator, General Zia, and he was known for his very radicalized policy, and Pakistan and India, they were going through a lot of state conflict between the two countries. That was a time when Madame Noor Jahan, on her personal, not as a guest by Pakistan, she visited India in 1982. And she met Indira Gandhi, and she also sang a song for her son Rajiv Gandhi at the time. And that was a time when she met Dalip Kumar. There was an interview with the both of them. They have it together, and they discussed how they have spent the times together, how she used to cook food on the sets, and with all those Indian actors, how she met her old neighbors in where she used to live in India, in Mumbai, how she visited all those places, her colleagues, her old neighbors, those neighbors' child who are now grown-up kids. This is something which makes an artist very unique, because art is one genre which is beyond border. Art is one genre which is beyond the state conflict. So that was a time when she bypassed that military, hegemonic, radicalized rule. And she made a statement by visiting India and meeting all those artists that public have different sentiments the state might and the governments might have their conflict, but the people and the human psychology, they connect through love, through art, through the genre of culture. Noor Jahan, Madam Noor Jahan, Malka Taranum, as she is titled, the Queen of Melody, and Lataji, they were very good and close friends and used to respect her a lot. So there was this I think it's a very symbolic, iconic moment where they both met at a no man's land between India and Pakistan. Again, I find it to be very symbolic that how art does not belong to any land, and how the people across the border, they are there, and they tend to unite at a no man's land. This is something beyond the era of time and the control and the stereotypes or the barriers. If you look at the other one, how they have those friendly ties with each other. Now, I'm talking about a time period where there was this huge state conflict, and those Indira Gandhi and General Zia era is known to be, that was a very strenuous time between India and Pakistan. And look at this, where we see how she is sitting and they're all talking. Now, it is not only confined, her life history is not only confined only to be a cultural ambassador, an artist who is celebrated across the border. There is this music of resistance which Madam Noor Jahan introduced in Pakistan. What's the music of resistance? So coming back to that time period, Indira, 1980s, two poets, very well known, Ahmad Faraz and Habib Jaleb and Faiz Ahmad Faiz. They were put behind the bar. Their poetry was banned. Why? Because they were the one who were talking about, who were writing in their poetry and in their poems indirectly against those radicalized, those hardcore policies of the sitting government, General Zia. And they were calling out those hardcore military policies and those hardcore radicalized policies on the banning the freedom of speech, on the equal rights, on the freedom of movement of the people, the socialist values. Noor Jahan resisted through her music, and she sang all those songs exactly in that time period when these poets were banned, Habib Jaleb, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, and she actually made those ghazals and those poetry eternally popular and immensely popular. So this was a unique contribution as an artist in the music of resistance. As we can see, so that there is this title with Madam Noor Jahan. This is a very well-known, very famous ghazal by Faiz Ahmad Faiz, which he sang, and he's saying that there is this darkness of hegemony which has surrounded, and now I no more have the time for the worldly love, but I need to see how to counter this hegemonic, this misogynistic, and this radical control in my country. And she, at that time, she sang that. So not only that, she was that she just called. She was through a music of resistance, art diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, or across the border. Because when we talk about art and culture, we cannot come above the time period. We cannot detach it from the subjectivity of that time, because all art, all literature, all those things are relevant to the time period in which they are written in, because they are coming up with a historical subjectivity. 1980s, General Zia, an extremely strict moral policing for the women. All the women on the media, they were supposed to come with the head covered. There was a strict moral code. They were not, the policy was such that the newscasters and the actors or the singers, there has to be in a very kind of a very astute, very moderate, very conservative, very strict setting. That I've taken this picture from that time period. She defied all those conforming policies by the sitting dictator, by the sitting radical government at that time. And she remained a non-conformist in her style statement and her charisma and the way she used to. I think being a sociologist, I cannot detach myself how to explain the symbols. For example, the flower in her hair or the sari that she's draping, the way she's carrying herself. This is all the defiance to those conforming values at that time, where everybody was rather either banned from the media, that is from the TV or the radio station. She was there, to be there, to be liberated herself. The most I think iconic part is the longevity of popularity. She started her career from the cinema, mainstream singing, 1935, although she was singing long before that. Till her last song was in 2000, just few months before she succumbed to her battle to cancer. Now, this is a huge longevity of an artist, of the popularity. We are not talking about the top of the chart time period in Iraq. And, she started from the street theater to the radio and then to the cinema and then to the TV and YouTube and the Spotify. And all those multi-layered of mediums are there. And her longevity of popularity stayed there. So in one of her interviews, when she mentioned, and she says that the words, they have its own musicology, and there is a rhythm and there is a feel in every word of the poetry that she reads and that she sings, and she tries to understand the musicology of that word, and she does not want that word to be covered by the layer of her singing. She said that she wants the word to come out and to sprout and to blossom by her singing and not to be overcovered by the layers of those, the music. That this was a very interesting epistemology of singing. This is a very interesting way of how she described the philosophy of music and the philosophy of poetry. For her, I think she goes a very iconic artist for the 20th century, because if we see her, not only from the genre of art and culture, but how she resisted the politics of radicalization, through the music of resistance, how she resisted those kind of hostility between on the borders because of the sitting governments, through her culture, through her beyond, and an artist celebrated across the border. So she was a huge influencer, and she set up a lot of role modeling, and how she defied all those gender stereotypes and all those things. And she continued, emerge as a very strong female artist in a heavily male dominant industry of media. So, and then her longevity of popularity through multi layers of medium, that makes her very unique and popular. I hope I have been able to cover her life, though it's very difficult to cover something which was over a span of half of a century. But I've picked up the main life events from her life and to try to relate it with the spirit of SAARC.
Thank you very much, Nabiha, for sharing your insightful lecture on Madam Noor Jahan. So our next speaker is Dr. Kumud Bhansali, who is a postdoctoral research fellow in a collaborative project between South Asian University and Aarhus University. Dr. Kumud worked as an assistant professor at Symbiosis International University. She also founded the Center for Writing and Communicative practices. With this brief introduction, I invite Dr. Kumud for lecture.
Thank you. Good evening or good afternoon, since I'm in the part of the world where it's afternoon now. I want to begin by thanking the SAARC Cultural Centre for this invitation. I must also say it's an honor to be part of this panel and in the company of such accomplished women who are here to speak about the legacies of women from their own context and from countries that constitute a part of the SAARC region and talk about contributions that have enriched our lives. So it would be rather a trite opening statement if I said that 15 minutes is too short to delve into the life and works of Irawati Karvé, let alone do justice to it, to her oeuvre, in fact. So, and I'm also not making claims of being an expert on the person. But just to provide some context about the title, when I committed to this title, Irawati Karve, a portrait of a woman, the braiding of two disciplines, and a nation in becoming, I saw it as an opportunity to also bring together some of the ideas that emerged in discussions in the undergraduate classroom where I taught courses in anthropology apart from other things that Dr. Gandhi mentioned. So I must say that I have my students to thank for this title, whose relentless probing about what makes sociology and anthropology two different disciplines in the context that we are, even when the subject matter seems to be quite similar, if not identical. I doubt if I'll be able to answer all these questions in the 15 minutes that we have, but hopefully something more concrete will emerge during these deliberations. So here I want to lay out a rough sketch, let's say an outline, and not a fully fleshed out portrait as the title promises. I'd start on a personal note. So I was introduced to Irawati Karve's work through Professor Susan Vishwanathan, and I feel it's important to acknowledge this legacy and this lineage. I take the charge which is put forth by Patricia Broy, Nandini Sundar, and Satish Deshpande when very seriously when they talk about the amnesia that we suffer from in terms of acknowledging our disciplinary founders and teachers. And I don't want to be guilty of that charge. So it was Professor Susan Vishwanathan who would effortlessly pull out of her hat texts and authors that I would then very excitedly go, to the internet and look up for. And one such text was Uganda. And this was in 2011 when I was a master's student at the Center for Study of Social Systems at JNU. And a few pages into the text where Karve summarizes what the text is about, what Uganda is about, rather what Mahabharata is about in a pithy line. She says somewhere 6-7 pages down the line, it's the struggle for property in a joint family. And in that one concise line, we see why she thought the story had to be retold, because it was not only of civilizational but also contemporary relevance. Before I go further, I think it would be apt to lay out the biographical details. So, who is this figure, Irawati Karve, and why is she important, not only to one, but to two very significant disciplines in pre colonial and post colonial India? So, Irawati Karve was born in Burma in 1905 to a Chitpavan Brahmin family, also known as Kokanastha Brahmins, which means those from the coast. Her father was an employee at the Burma Cotton Company and named her daughter Irawati after the river Irawadi that ran through what is now known as Myanmar. Irawati was sent to Pune where she was adopted by the Paranspe family, also a family of leading educationists of Pune, where she went to school with the daughter of the Paranspes. She did her BA in philosophy from Ferguson College, Pune, and proceeded to study sociology at Bombay University under G.S. Ghuri. and her master's dissertation was titled The Chitpavan Brahmins. It was in Bombay, now Mumbai, that she met Dinkar Karve, son of the social reformer Maharshi Dondo Keshav Karve. Dinkar had gone to Germany to study, where he received his PhD and later encouraged Irawati that she pursue her doctoral studies there. Ironically, after much contestations at home and against the wishes of her social reformer father in law, who advocated widow remarriage and himself married a widow and was also the founder of SNDT University, which is the first women's university in India, that Irawati eventually went to Germany. So there were a lot of battles she had to first fight at home before she could leave for Germany. And there she was housed in Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology, Human Heredity and Eugenics, where her doctoral guide was Eugene Fisher. And this is an extremely important moment in the life of Irawati Karve, who has a doctoral supervisor, or as in Germany, in Berlin, Dr. Watter, which is doctoral father, whose work is on racial hygiene and purity, which eventually would strengthen the Nazi philosophy. And so it's important to set some temporal context here. It's in 1927 that she leaves for Berlin. So we're talking about the 1920s, where Germany is ravaged by the humiliating terms of post World War One Treaty of Versailles, and the Germany that Karve witnesses of soldiers debilitated by the war, begging on streets on the one hand, and then this very vibrant, culturally alive Germany, and then there's this other Germany where she could see the anti Semitic ferment also growing, in particular ways, which was ominous and foretelling of what was about to unfold, as the Nazis would take over. So, setting that historical context, we also need to then delve a little bit into her past to see that while her subsequent training was in Germany, she was also someone who was trained by Gured's sociological perspective on Hindu India, which took the Indological perspective and did not see, which was criticized for not accounting for the dynamic changes that took place. And all this becomes very important bookmarks or placeholders, because what we are talking about as an ontological perspective, what is called book view, that later sociologists would then counter with the field view, creates some, conversations about how the discipline moves within across time. So, coming back to Karve, her experience in Germany, and when we look back at those experiences, we see them with horror, because what was unfolding there was the scientific racism, a racism that emerged with and was justified by science based on erroneous assumptions. So what she does in her thesis and what her research is that on the basis of anthropometric data, which is the shape of the skull, color of eyes, so on and so forth, her doctoral supervisor's advice is to prove the racial superiority hypothesis based on these methods. And in her very thesis title, she defies and disproves the hypothesis that her supervisor assumes would be proved right, where she says the normal asymmetry of the human skull. This, in a way, so this is where she says that what she was against was finding differences between humans, but more dangerously, assigning meaning and hierarchy to those differences based on the politics of the assigner, which in this case is her supervisor, Eugene Fisher. So now I come to the discipline. And how Irawati Karve's presence looms quite tall in the twin disciplines of sociology and anthropology in India. When I say braiding of these disciplines, I mean that we have in the, at least in the Indian context, sociology, social anthropology, which are sometimes synonymous, and then there is also this anthropology departments where you have sometimes the four field disciplines, which includes archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, and cultural anthropology as one of the four fields. So, in a context like this, Satish Deshpande also reminds us to not forget about the reciprocal relationship between anthropology and colonialism while we are trying to understand what it means to practice these disciplines in the post-colonial context. So, and what are those reminders that we need to keep in mind? That these are shaped by theories, scholars of the West, local influences, but also nexus between knowledge, institutions, and practices in the life of a particular discipline. And this is where I think it becomes so crucial to situate Karve's trajectory in terms of someone. And just as Professor Rayamajhi and Dr. Fatima said, that it's very interesting that, like Parijat and Noor Jahan, Irawati Karvé does not identify as a feminist, and yet her positionality that emerges in the context of while being in Germany, where she is the only student of color, female student of color in a classroom of otherwise male or some female students, how she chooses to stand up and assert against the authority and the biases of the people that she is supposed to, and here that she's supposed to ascribe certain that she's supposed to converge with, probably, so that's the expectation, that a docile female student who converges with what is being said. And that's precisely the point where, in her biography written by her granddaughter and an anthropologist, where she says that some of this has to do with her own caste privilege of the educational and cultural capital and the cosmopolitan vibrance that she was raised in, and she was, that she witnessed growing up. So, I know I don't have much more time left, so I'm going to say that what is curious when I look at Irawati Karve's academic scholarship is that, in this very curious sort of way, she chooses to operationalize the same methods that she was trained in when she was in Germany. And she, of course, warns us against drawing erroneous conclusions based on these methods, but nevertheless, she continues to choose those methods. So I'm going to leave the listeners with two quotes from Irawati Karve, and I think they were as relevant in 1963 when she was writing this, but they're much more relevant today. She says that our history shows that in every century, new people have come and made India their home. It is a fascinating subject for study to try to find out what we are, Indians as a whole, but it is entirely wrong to imagine ancestries and base claims on territories as somehow one's own. All those who are in India today who feel it is their homeland are Indians. The society we want to build is not a Hindu society or a Hindi society, but a multilingual, multicultural society which has knowledge for one another's culture and has decided to live and work together in comradeship. This is from The Racial Factor in Indian Social Life, 1963. With this, I will close my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Kumud Bhansali, for sharing your insightful thoughts on the first Indian female anthropologist, Irawati Karve. Now I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Jinat Ara Haque, the Chief Executive of Weekend Alliance to End Violence Against Women in Bangladesh. Jinat Ara Haque leads a platform of women rights platform and boosted an international campaign in country. In Bangladesh, a platform named Amrai Pare has been established and known to all with the coordination of Jinat. She is experienced in program design and implementation. She has been working for 23 years as development activist. Her main area is gender and violence against women. She has worked on gender issues in different organizations and platforms. She comes from anthropology background. Jinat is skilled to work with the network and alliance. She developed different campaign plan on women rights for Bangladesh and South Asia. She involves in Global Weekend campaign and earlier Sanitation for All by 2010 in Bangladesh campaign. Gina works in different policy advocacy like domestic violence law formulation and implementation, Child Marriage Restraint Act review and implementation, sexual harassment prevention policy in education institutes, election of women received seat in parliament, water and sanitation inclusion in textbook curriculum. And Jinath has experience in media advocacy and campaign. She developed several scripts for audio and visual media. She's a member of International Visitor Leadership Program of USA, member of Girls Not Bride Platform, Social Action Committee in Bangladesh, and Citizen Initiative Against Domestic Violence in Bangladesh. So Jinat Ara Haque will now share her thoughts on Begum Sufia Kamal, highlighting her contribution as a renowned poet in Bangladesh. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you to give me the opportunity to talk in SAARC Cultural Centre program. And thanks to all the speaker. I have I listened all their experience and the stories of the very the activist, the women that. So it is very. I think it's a very nice program. I am today. I'm talking about Sufia Kamal. Sufia Kamal is renowned in our country as a courageous mother. In that means Jonuni Shahushika. She is an iconic figure of women rights, social activism, and the progressive movement in Bangladesh. Though she is also a famous poet and a novelist. She was born on 20th June 1911 and died 1999. She lived through the areas of British rule, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Actually, her name is Sayeda Sufia Begum, and she was born in her maternal home in Shahistabad, located in the Bakirganj district, which is now called Borishan. When her father left the family to become a Sufi ascetic and never returned home, she was shifted from her paternal house to her maternal house when she was only 7 months old. Her education began at the local maktub, where she learned Arabic. As she grew older, she was bound to switch to home education as per cultural norms. During that time, girls from Muslim and respectable families, they are not allowed to go to school. So her mother Sabira Begum taught her how to read and write in Bengali. She found a rich library at her maternal uncle's house, which opened up the outside world to her. At the age of 7, she went to Kolkata with her mother, where she met Begum Rokia, a prominent Bengali feminist thinker, writer, educator, and political activist from British India. Begum Rokia influenced her a lot to think against patriarchal norms. At the age of 11, Sufia was married off to her maternal cousin, Miss Syed Nehal Hussain. A short story, Shoinuk Bodhu, which Sufia wrote, was published in a local paper in 1923 when she was only 12 years old. It was a revolutionary initiative by a Muslim woman to publish a story in a paper. Her own family members scolded her for publishing this writer. In 1925, at the age of 14, Sufia met Mahatma Gandhi, and his philosophy influenced her to break the pride of family aristocracy and work for the people. Her first poem, Bashanti, was published in Shaugat magazine in 1926. In 1931, she became the first Bengali Muslim female member of the Indian Women Federation. In 1932, when Sufia was only 21, her husband died, leaving behind a daughter, Amina. After the sudden death of her husband, she fell into financial crisis and started teaching at Kolkata Corporation School. continuing her profession until 1942. In 1937, she published her first collection of short stories, Kear Kata, Thorns of the Kea Tree. Her first book of poems, Shajher Maya, came out in 1938, bearing a foreword from Kazi Nazrul Islam and attracting praise from Rabindranath Tagore. Kamaluddin Ahmed met Sufia when she was under treatment at the hospital and proposed to her. It was also a town-bound decision to marry a widow with a girl by Kamaluddin. Then Sufia turned to Sufia Kamal. Sufia became the inaugural editor of the Begum weekly magazine specializing in women's issues. Begum was very popular in Muslim community in Bangladesh. That time there was a drastic change in politics in 1947. In October of that year, after the partition of India, she came to Bangladesh, especially in Dhaka. During a huge clash between Hindus and Muslims at that time, Sufia worked for peace and joined the Peace Committee in 1948. When the Purva Pakistan Mohila Committee was formed, she became its chairman. Sufia's activism continued in 1952 with the language movement. She formed the children's organization also, Kochi Kachar Mela, in 1956. In 1961, when the Pakistan government banned Robindra Sangeet, she became involved in the movement among Bengalis that ensued in 1961. She was selected as the president of Chayanat, the organization which popularizing Robindra Sangeet. During the mass uprising in 1969, which demanded the resignation of Pakistani military general Ayub Khan, she promoted the cause by forming Mohila Sangram Parishad. She demanded the name of Rokia for the first women's hall of Dhaka University. In later life, she made women's rights her top priority and headed Bangladesh's largest women organization, Bangladesh Mohila Parishad, for many years. She was also the first chairperson of BRAC. You know, BRAC is the biggest NGO in Bangladesh. There was no social movement in which Sufia Kamal was not involved in her time. Sufia Kamal showed her bravery several times. Once, at a meeting with social elites of Dhaka, Ayub Khan commented that ordinary people are like beasts and as such not fit to be given the franchise. Sufia Kamal immediately stood up and remarked, if the people are beasts, then as the president of the republic, you are the king of the beast. And all the people are just astonished because they it is very unusual that a woman she protested a General Ayub Khan. Jillu Rahman, the regional director of Radio East Pakistan, forwarded a paper to Sufia Kamal to sign with the statement. In 1971, no massacre took place in Bangladesh. When she refused, Rahman threatened, if you don't give your signature, then it might create a problem, both of you and your son-in-law, Abdul Kahar, because that time Abdul Kahar was working at Radio Pakistan. Sufia told him that she didn't care for her life. She said, I would rather die than put my signature on the false statements. She actively but secretly helped freedom fighters to one. Several people in Dhaka, in, including Professor Ghiyasuddin and writer Shahidullah Kaisar, collected medicine, food, and delivered those to the post of Sufia Kamal's house, from where the freedom fighters picked those for their training outpost. As the Pakistani army kept a close watch on her, she would try to help the freedom fighters in different ways, ignoring the risk. The Pakistan army killed Sufia Kamal's son-in-law, Kahar Chowdhury. After the Liberation War, she became a symbol of social, cultural, and political activism. Her veranda was the center and dream of all social, cultural, and progressive activism in Bangladesh. She was involved in the investigation of the murder of intellectuals during the Liberation War, welfare of martyrs' families, and national reconstruction. In her old age at 90s, her role against the fascism was remarkable. She received a lot of award, lot of prize, Bangla Academy Literature Award for Literature, Ekusha Padok, জাতীয় কবিতা পরিষদ অ্যাওয়ার্ড, বেগম রোকেয়া পদক, দেশবন্ধু সিয়ার দাস গোল্ড মেডেল, চেকোস্লোভাকিয়া মেডেল, ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্স ডে অ্যাওয়ার্ড. Sufia Kamal said that listening to Rabindra Sangit is a kind of praying. And this statement angered the fundamentalist group, who declared her as a murtad. Some of her publications include মৃত্তিকার ঘ্রাণ, একাত্তরের ডায়েরি, বেনি বিন্যাসের সময় তো আর নাই, and একালে আমাদের কাল. Now I'm trying to share a very short analysis of her writings. We see a strong philosophy of humanity that focuses on feminism in her writing. Some lines from her writings. Why are only women abandoned by their husbands? It can be reversed also. Men can be abandoned by women. It is a line from যে নদী মরুপথে হারালো ধারা. This shows a strong sense of equal relationships, where the writer also expressed the equal rights of women that are overlooked by patriarchal society. Another line, women cannot be a good mother or good wife if men don't control their masculinity. This is the interesting issue that she talked about the masculinity on that time. She focuses on power structure and traditional views and attitudes of men towards women. She also wrote, if you don't say sorry to the women, then being a woman, I cannot pardon you. It's a line from Kiar Kata. Throughout her life, actually, she talked about this issue, the sisterhood of women, the alliance of the network. Such a powerful writer, she has written many amusing rhymes for children also. The poem we used to read as children, when we played with the dolls in our time, you were at the age studied a lot. When we flew the kites under the sky, you drove the airplane. That means she always welcomed change, loved children, youth, and respected their new ideas. The thoughts of mine, that's what actually Sufia Kamal did in her overall life, in her writings. Actually, she breaks the dichotomy of public and private doctrine for women, where men dominate the public sphere, whereas women are essentially relegated to the private sphere. She strongly belongs in both the private and public sphere. Her sweet dishes were very popular to all. She was good at cooking, stitching, took care of her children. At the same time, she was at protest, led many organizations, and gave speeches against unjust system. That's why she was called Kalamma, mother sister, and her bravery is memorable. A quotation from her daughter Sultana Kamal, I am Tulu, her daughter, and Sultana, another daughter. I and Tulu used to listen to fairy tale stories from my mother when she washed her clothes at the pond site at Tararbag house. This is the issue that people think that Sufia Kamal is very close to us. That when she called people that we need to do something, then people agreed because they feel that Sufia Kamal is very much our person. She breaks the attitude of socialist philosophy. Though she believes in Marxist philosophy, she at the same time she was a practicing Muslim. Fundamentalists criticized her as a non-believer, but in her every writing or personal diary, she prayed to Allah for the betterment of her children, not her biological children, for the children of the country. She didn't see the oppression of women as mainly a class issue. She spoke out against fundamentalism, religious superstition, and the wrong message from religious based group. She was a believer and practitioner, but not a fundamentalist. She is a feminist and reformer who formed women's rights organizations, led them, and encouraged the leadership of women. Nowadays, the Sustainable Development Goals say leaving no one behind. But in her writing, she mentioned the line of leaving no one behind. We are lucky. Actually, in Bangladesh, we are lucky to have Sufia Kamal, who could reject an award in protest of militarization, who didn't belong to any political party, but made her own unique image to all the people as a neutral and respectable person. Sufia Kamal said, I do not politics of any party. I cannot remain silent when there is anything that hinders the disclosure of the truth or where there is an insult to humanity. My conscience haunts me. That is why, even while involved in socio-cultural institution, I have protested against anything that has hurt me. Some lines from her poem. It is not time for dressing up. Whether the shari has a decorative border or not, it is not the time for beautiful makeup. This is our fight now for life and death. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. That was Jinat Ara Haque from Bangladesh. Now we have Irushi Tennekoon joining from Sri Lanka. Irushi is an illustrator, animator, and educator based in Colombo. Her illustrations have been published by organizations like Room to Read and UNICEF Sri Lanka, and her animated films have been screened in local and international festivals, winning several awards. She also regularly conducts workshops on storytelling through illustration and animation. Through her collaborative projects with various subject experts, she seeks to highlight important issues ranging from gender and health to the environment and climate change. Her illustrated and animated projects thus educate and entertain in equal measure. She recently graduated with an MA in animation from the Royal College of Art in London, supported by a Chevening scholarship. Her previous education was in English studies, and she taught undergraduate English for about a decade before pursuing her studio-based artistic practice. Irushi also currently works as a lecturer of animation at the Academy of Design in Colombo. Her most recent film titled Is This an Architectural Documentary based on architect Minette De Silva's Watapulua housing scheme, made in collaboration with architects filmmakers Sumeda Kalekama and Sumudu Attukorala, was screened at the 88 Acres exhibition at the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Sri Lanka from November 2023 to July 2024. Her animated series titled Animate Her features the animated interviews of a group of exceptional women living and working in Sri Lanka. Through modes of stop motion and experimental animation, the Animate Her series brings to life the stories of marine biologist and a children's author, an illustrator, a wildlife conservationist, a lawyer and activist, a traditional dancer, an architect, and an ICT entrepreneur. Through her work, she highlights everyday stories from Sri Lanka and South Asia with the hope of adding to a wider global discourse on storytelling through illustration and animation. Irushi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Apsi, and thank you to the SAARC Cultural Centre for inviting me to speak with this extremely amazing panel. I hope I do justice. I hope I do justice to Minette De Silva. So just a disclaimer, I am going to be speaking about Minette De Silva, who was an architect rather. I'm speaking about her not from the point of view of an architect or a subject expert, but rather from the point of view of a researcher and someone who worked on an animated documentary about her life. And this project actually focused on one of her housing projects, which was a housing project for government servants that she did in 1956. So just in the early years of independence. But I've just put some slides together, and a lot of them they include some film stills from our animated documentary. Yes, so just to give some context, Minette De Silva was born in 1918 and she died in 1998. So she experienced the the era of colonization, and then she was away for her studies, and she returned after her studies in London. She returned into a newly independent country, so it was quite an interesting time for her to be practicing architecture. And when I started working on this film, I worked with two other architects, and what we realized was we went and spoke to so many people, because Minette, other than for an autobiography that she left behind, there wasn't really an archive. We didn't have any original drawings or any original models to really study her practice. So it was really this book that we went by. And other than that, we went and spoke to lots of other architects who knew her, and we spoke to residents of the houses that she has built, and that's really how we started piecing her story together, and that's what I'm going to share. What we realized when we spoke to people was that, like you can see in her photo, everybody was just able to describe how she looked. And they said Minette was a beautiful woman, and she was always in sari. She had a flower in her hair, and she was cosmopolitan. She was this really, So they just had all these adjectives to sort of describe how she looked, and or otherwise people would describe her by her associates and the people she knew, because she came from a very prominent family, and therefore she had lots of connections, and she was friends with people in high places, and very strangely she was even friends with people like Pablo Picasso and Le Corbusier, who was sort of the father of modern architecture. So it was really quite. That was the challenge really for us, to dig deeper beyond these associations, beyond her appearance, and to figure out who Minette De Silva was. But I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to talk a little bit about her associates and where she came from. So these are two oil paintings of her parents. Her father was someone called Jorge De Silva. He was a prominent politician in the day, and he was also a state councillor. And he was a Sinhalese man. And the mother was a Dutch burgher descent, a burgher. She came from a burgher ethnicity, so it was a mixed marriage in that sense. And burghers, for those of you who are not familiar, are descendants of the Dutch, because we were also colonized by the Dutch and the Portuguese before the British. So Agnes Nell was another incredible woman. She fought for universal franchise in Sri Lanka. She was a women's rights activist. So Minette grew up in this sort of really powerful household. This is another, still like a sketch from our film again. So the parents, after they got married, they had 5 children, and Minette was the youngest. And this is, again, we've illustrated Minette, because in the film we decided we're not going to really show any photographs of Minette, because that was really what stopped us from understanding her. We do show a couple of photographs towards the end of the film, but everything otherwise is sort of covered up with an illustration and our own interpretation of her. Her sister was another incredible woman, and she was one of the founding members of the Mag magazine. Her name was Anil De Silva, and she also, along with Minette, they traveled extensively, and they were both absolutely cosmopolitan women. They were very politically aware, and they were both doing incredible things for the arts in this period. Minette then went on to study at the JJ School of Art in Mumbai, and then she continued her studies in London at the Architectural Association. And what we discovered there was that through the kinds of magazines that we found from her remaining archive, she was reading a lot about modern architecture, and how modern architecture was then becoming applicable to different regional contexts outside the West. So she studied modernism in London, and then she brings it back to Ceylon, or now Sri Lanka, after independence, and she was looking at ways of applying modernism in a local regional context. She also formed what was known as a studio of modern architecture out of her home in Kandy. And she started her practice with a small group of people. Just to go back to some of her influences, in her writings, in her book, she talks about two main people that influenced her practice. And one is Le Corbusier, who I mentioned earlier, who was a French architect and known as the father of modern architecture. And the other one is a Scottish botanist and town planner who lived a few decades before Minette, actually. And his name was Patrick Geddes. And in her writing, she mentions that Le Corbusier and Patrick Geddes were sort of the perfect counterbalance to her practice. Cobb or Le Corbusier being the perfect sort of typical modernist who just built, like, it was very functional. The buildings were very functional. They were not necessarily aesthetic. And then you had someone like Patrick Geddes, who was a botanist going into town planning, who looked at very organic ways of understanding people, understanding the environment, understanding the local culture or regional culture, and applying town planning in that sense, rather than looking at it from a completely modern sense, where you just take a building and sort of put it in a sense that, in a context that may not make sense. So Minette sort of, what she did was she combined these two thinking, these two practices of modern and also applicability to the region, to the local climate. And we see in her buildings, in the buildings that she made in Sri Lanka, that they were typically modern, but they were also very, very adaptable to the tropics of Sri Lanka. And she also worked very closely with local craftspeople. She incorporated local crafts into her buildings, which was very unique. Which was a very unique approach to designing modern architecture for the region. And these are, again, another. On the right is another image of her with Mukherjee and Pablo Picasso at a peace conference. Again, Minette was able to go to these spaces because of maybe her family background. But what we've also realized is that she was quite conscious of this privilege of coming from a family like this, of maybe coming from a family that spoke English, that made so many things accessible to her. But what's amazing is that she used this privilege to come back to Sri Lanka and then serve her community. And when we looked at that, at the housing project that I mentioned earlier, that our film focused on, what was quite incredible was that she went out and she spoke to these government servants who were going to live in these houses. She went to the extent of designing a questionnaire and giving it out to ask people how they wanted their houses built. And this is a massive project of over 200 houses. And she still took the time to listen to each individual to figure out what their preferences were. And the two architects in the project, they were telling me that this is something called participatory architecture, which we explored a little deeper. So Minette was practicing participatory architecture in the region when no one else really was, especially in a time where modern architecture was becoming prominent. This is, again, another really interesting photograph that we came across in our research. And it's a picture of the delegates at the SIAM conference in Bridgewater, Somerset, just after the Second World War. And you have all the leading modern architects of the day who have come together to figure out how, in the context of the post-war, how the architects are going to come together to think about reconstruction. What was the future of the world going to look like? And amongst this incredible panel, you have in the front row, I don't know if you can spot her, but Minette De Silva again, seated amongst all these delegates. Interestingly, she wasn't representing Sri Lanka or Ceylon at the time. Rather, she was here as a delegate of the Mug magazine, which she was part of with her sister. But just to contextualize again the importance of Minette being here, at this point in her time, she was just completing, she hadn't completed her studies yet at the Architectural Association. She was still a student in London. But what was quite incredible was that she goes on then in the following year and forms her own studio in Kandy in Sri Lanka. And she's one of two women in the entire world to form their own practice, to form their own practice without a husband, without a partner, without a company or a group of people. So that she's one of two women to start a solo practice run by a solo architectural practice run by a woman. What was also looking from a more like a feminist visual culture from that perspective also. And if you try to locate Minette's role here as a woman architect, in the history of women in architecture, at least, they've initially just been looked at as a muse and not really a practicing architect. They've then gone on to be accepted as craftspeople who are just carrying out the crafts that were designed by men. And later on, they became architects' assistants. And then in history, we find husband and wife duos like Charles and Ray Eames. And then finally, when we come to Minette's era, we have the women practicing on their own. So it's sort of decades of women being neglected or overlooked in the history of architecture. And then finally, we have Minette and Lida Bobati, who was a Brazilian architect who started their own practices. So it's quite phenomenal that they were the first in the world, in that sense, to start their own practice. In addition to Minette's building practice, she was also a phenomenal thinker, and she was a writer. So she wrote about her practice, and in her book, I think that's really quite golden. It was so precious to us to come across her writings in her book. And she published in the Marg magazine, and she also wrote an article for Sir Bannister Fletcher's A History of Architecture. And she wrote a really interesting article for the Journal of the Ceylon Institute of Architects, which is now known as the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects. So she wrote this article called Experiments in Modern Regional Architecture in Ceylon, 1950 to 1960. And there she looked at the word regional when no one else in the world was really considering this word regional or modern regional architecture. And now it's called critical regionalism in architecture. So she was a pioneer in so many ways in that sense. And looking at her writing, it's mind-blowing to see that in that era that she was considering some of these words now that we just use, we just take for granted today. This is an illustration of her book. It's called Volume 1, Minette De Silva, Life and Work of an Asian Woman Architect. So she was quite aware of who she was, and the title itself shows that. Life and Work of an Asian Woman Architect. So she identifies herself with these terms. And even her wearing the sari, there are photographs of her wearing sari and climbing ladders to go and check on sites, to check on a building site. And this just shows that as an architect, it was really quite in a male-dominated space. It was quite incredible that she didn't really feel the need to let go of her femininity or her the fact that she was a woman. She didn't really feel the need to sacrifice that to be in this field, and she really owned it, which was quite fabulous for a woman working in the 50s and 60s. She had a manuscript put together for a volume 2, but that never came out. And unfortunately, this volume 1 is also out of print, but we're really hoping that it'll be in circulation again soon. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to speak a little bit about what it was like working on this documentary with barely an archive to work with. So the three of us, we placed ourselves in the film as people going on a journey to figure out who Minette De Silva was. And we also used some stop motion. We created a puppet of Minette De Silva, and we animated that to sort of figure out what she may have been like during her lifetime. How would she have occupied a space? So it was really quite an interesting approach to understand Minette through film and through animation, and to understand through her what her impact on architecture was. I'm going to end there. I don't know if I went too quickly, but I hope to speak a little bit more maybe in the discussion. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Hiroshi. So now this is the end of the round. So if I request if the online participants, if they have any comments or any questions from our speakers.
Can I ask a question on Noor Jahan?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Dr.
please go ahead. Was there any significant style that you said she's crafted her own style, right? So was there any significant style that was very, very post-partition or very Pakistani that you would want to talk about or to remember Noor Jahan as? Is there anything very significant that reminds you of her?
Yes, absolutely. So there are two things about her. One, I will talk about her voice. Being a female singer, this has always been seen that female singers, as we are talking, we will be talking about a highly patriarchal lens as well. So the voice needs to be very passive and very soft, and it has to be, be dominated by the male voice. So she became the lead singer because she had a unique voice and it was at a very louder pitch, and she never used to try to dull it down, and she kept her pitch as it was. And for the movie songs, so there was loads of songs which she sang in the indigenous languages, especially in Punjabi and Sindhi language, where the expression of love was very bold, was very expressive, and and that is why she was, many a time she was criticized as well. And that was also there in her style senses, in her style sense, because I remember growing up in 1980 as a young kid in the 7-8 years old 1980s, my mother and the khalas and the aunties, when they were used to watch, so there was this kind of a layering for the women. There was a ghetto for women, which was very much institutionalized, which was very much state supported, that the women need to be covered, they need to be in the ghetto, they need to be there. There was a certain subtleness which was there. Through her style, the saris, her jewelry, her makeup, the flower in her hair, everything symbolized defying that control. And, as you were also talking about a female architect, celebrating the femininity about her, the sexuality, the femininity that needs to be celebrated for a woman. And thirdly, the age shaming, which has always been a part of the culture of subcontinent, the Indo-Pak. So after a certain age, women are seen that they shouldn't dress up that. And I can, quote so many language discourse words in it. So she defied that. So that was her style sense, the boldness.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. I think it was a much needed question. So to elaborate her style more, I see there's a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question was also related to Madam Noor Jahan. So how, I wanted to ask, why did this transition to sending out messages regarding the socio-political narrative through her music came about, and how important that was from a woman's perspective, because of the era that you talked about Islamization during the Zia's rule particularly. So how important was that from a woman's perspective to do that and share those narratives through her music?
It's a very interesting, it is a very amazing question. And it is very important to ask these questions to highlight that how important these struggles, which have never been labeled in that time as a feminist struggle, but now we are acknowledging that those were the women that who carved out the female role models at that time. One, she was a female singer in a very male-dominated industry, and she turned out to be a leading singer. And at that time, when both the countries at state level, as I quoted between General Zia and the sitting Prime Minister, Ms. Indira Gandhi, there was a very hostile relationship between the countries. She opted to go for a personal trip to celebrate the golden jubilee of a studio ceremony in India. That was the message which was for the artists for both sides of the border, because Madam Noor Jahan had that unique thing that she is from a pre-colonial era where this border was not there, this division was not there. So through this, she influenced the artist as a role model on the both sides of the border, that art cannot be controlled or be regimented by the government or by the state or by the military policies. Secondly, for the women, her personal life in itself, the first marriage she was basically written off by her family. It was her love marriage. She has to quit her family. Then she married her first husband, Shaukat Rizvi. Then, there was a divorce case, and Noor Jahan ended up surrendering her Shahnur Studios share to get the custody of her 3 daughters. Then she married somebody from the industry who was a few years younger than her. And then, after the divorce, and then she continued her struggle in the journey all the time she has been, kind of targeted by the journalist, by those certain so-called male writers who would, bring up kind of bring up something, a spice up or a juicy news, to add that this is all about, a woman is all about being a wife or being a mother, and that is about. But at that time, she made her aura far bigger than that. She raised her children, her 6 children, single-handedly, was an icon, was a celebrity, and then she stood for those rights which were not even mentioned at that time. The interesting part is she stood for those things which did not even have a name at that time. Art beyond borders, hegemony, misogyny. Those things were not named in 1980s at the time when she stood for her. So I think now the leading singers in Pakistan, they all follow her, the style, the strength. So she set up, I think, a pedestal for women, that a woman can be there in the music industry and can rule that industry for more than 40 years and can be the most dominant figure. Thank you so much for asking this question. I hope this answers it.
Yeah, this answers my question. Thank you so much for answering it.
Most welcome. Thank you so much for asking this.
I have a question for Dr. Fatima. It's great presentation. In fact, I wanted to clap my virtual hands, but I was also thinking about my presentation, which followed yours. So the images that you showed, and this very specific image of Lata Mangeshkar and Noor Jahan in one slide, and you say that this is the meeting of the two artists, their friendship, but also like meeting in what you call the no man's land, right?
Yeah.
But I was fascinated by the clothing, the color of the clothing, where you see Noor Jahan wearing Pakistan flag colors and Lata Mangeshkar's sari having all the flag colors of India. And since you remarked in one of the subsequent pictures about her clothing and the semiotics of it, I thought, what do you think about these two luminaries coming together on this, on a ground which is supposed to be no man's land, yet very much representing through clothing and
I think this, I think that wasn't written or translated at that time. But as a sociologist and as an analyst, I think there is something that needs to be analyzed, that this has a huge symbolic presence, that art is united at a place which is absolutely a no man's land. So, both of them can represent their countries and, an icon for the people of their countries, but both are celebrated on both sides of the border. And there's a point of unification. There is this point of when they're mingling, and that is beyond the control of both the government or both the states. And this is where the public sentiments are there. So it goes for the Lataji. She is, I think, one of the most popular artists in Pakistan. Everybody, they grow up listening to her song, and the children who are learning music, they first learn Lataji and Kishore Kumar's song, and so goes for Madam Noor Jahan. So I think it has a huge symbolic presence, and the credit goes to Madam Noor Jahan because she started it at a time, because she had that persona of a larger than life. So there are certain people that when they make a move, it really makes a difference. And then everybody, they are the innovators, and then everybody follows up. So she was that innovator. She made that move. So till today, we see that in Indo-Pakistan, we still see that the artists, they do come, they do visit each other on certain festival or certain occasions. So the credit goes to her and to artists of her league, who built this foundation. And especially this radio show, I will add to this, Kumudji, that when they met, they both cried. That was a very sentimental moment. So the photographer was not allowed to take the picture at that time when they both cried a lot while they hugged each other. So only this picture was there in the archives.
Irushi, can I ask you a question? When you spoke about Minette, the architect, you mentioned that she was well placed in the society. Was she?
In the sense, yes, sorry, continue.
Yeah, let me continue. So, did she create a niche for herself? And if she did create that niche for herself, was it difficult for her as a woman, architect among all the men? So, what do you say to that?
Again, this is going by what we've read from her book, and because we didn't know her during her lifetime, and I'm sure a few things that we said are purely our assumptions based on what we've come across. So I don't know if it's really fair to really make assumptions on her life like that, but that's really what we have to go by. But in the sense of creating a niche, she definitely did. She knew what she wanted to do, because what was happening after independence was that Ceylon or Sri Lanka after independence was trying to figure out through architecture what the vocabulary of the country was going to be. How were we going to represent our buildings? What was happening was that there was this pseudo modernism where there were the architects at the time of independence were taking designs from the older, like the 14th century, 15th century, all the remains of the prehistoric sorry, not prehistoric, but all the historic architecture, and they were bringing in those designs of the motifs, the flowers, the lotuses, all these things, and bringing the temple art, the temple architecture, most likely, and they were bringing that into modern buildings that were built with bricks and stones and concrete. Whereas Minette said, I'm not going to do that. And in her writing, she's very clear. She says, I'm not going to take the ancient architectural style, the ancient crafts, and just apply it in concrete. I'm going to really understand what it means to build modern for the region. We are very uniquely placed in the tropics. And in that sense, she knew, like, she looked at what the big architects of the day were doing, and she dismissed it straight out, and she said, I'm going to design for myself. And she wasn't, at her time, she wasn't very popular, and this may have been because she was a woman. And I feel like a lot of people may have said, are you really sure you want to have a woman build in the 50s, a woman build your home? And there were just, I think it was through her dad's contacts, through her family contacts. I think it was family friends. Her first house that she designed was for a family friend. So it was, in that sense, she did have that privilege of starting out. And then she was eventually, through, I suppose because her dad was a politician, she got this massive project to design over 200 houses for a government housing scheme. And she used it in the best way possible by really speaking to the people, understanding the people. I feel like, again, this is my assumption, but I feel like if a male architect at that time may have been given the same project, I don't think they would have gone to the extent of giving them a questionnaire, really trying to understand how the women in the house, how the children in the house might want to use these spaces, which she did. And she said, for example, at that point, there wasn't a concept of like the garages were something that was sort of a shed that was built outside, so it wasn't really part of the house. But with modern architecture, something that came about was this attached carport. So it was part of the house, so you would drive into it and then get into the house. And she introduced the carport to these houses, and she said, would you like a carport? I mean, the car is not there, it can be a play area for children. So she had got, and these were the kinds of questionnaires that she had included, the questions that she had included in her survey that she gave out to people. So I feel like as a woman, she was uniquely placed. She was very aware that she got to this place maybe with a sense of privilege, but I don't think she misused it. I think she used it in the best way possible to serve her community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's a question. There's another question. I think it's by Bilal.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I think there was a question by Bilal Aziz. Was there a question? No?
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't unmute my mic. I had a question regarding the sort of thrashing through the sort of the societal narratives around the idea of love, because I think you mentioned something around Noor Jahan's first movie regarding, and even the playback singing regarding the idea of love. So why was it that before that the idea of love and showing it publicly was like so it was sort of a taboo issue, and how did it change, and did it actually change after that? And I also wanted to understand that how a woman taking the initiative changed that thing in particular.
Okay. I think you just nailed it by asking this question. So there were three things. One was the presence of the women. So the women were seen and are still seen, but we are talking about a 1930s era when it was even more, I think it was more imperialized version. It was a more Victorian version at that time, that the women's body were very much controlled and were seen as very dainty and petite figures. So when we are seeing that the female singers at the time had a very petite and a very mellowed voice, and the expression of love was also supposed to be by the men's side, and the rest of the love and those things were, and the public affection was considered to be something not what we call so-called a good woman's thing. So when both the movies in which he starred, the Khandan, and then the other one was Jugnu. In both the movies, it was about the love and the affection, and they were very expressive in itself. And the songs she sang and the kind of a pitch of voice she had, they all added a lot of strength, not only to the expression of love, but also to the empowerment, the empowering image, the glamorous image, which was too hard to digest for the society at that time. But yes, the point is that she didn't give up, and she remained who she was. And then she eventually became the style icon. And this did have an impact for the rest of the late artists later. For example, Tasawwur Khanam, Farida Khanam, and then we have Nahid Akhtar. So they all started following, her legacy and the way she dresses up. And that became a very normalized thing in the singing.
Thank you very much for your response, Dr. Nabiha. So the underlying fact that emerged from all these accounts of this remarkable women figure is that they have defied how women were defined and perceived by the society. Be it Begum Sufia or Madam Noor Jahan or Irawati. So all these women, they have emerged victorious, overcoming all the odds and hurdles set by the society. So on behalf of SCC, I thank all the speakers for agreeing to be a part of this event. Through them, we once again honored these remarkable women from South Asia. I hope this exercise of reflecting on the achievements of these extraordinary women will serve as a powerful source of inspiration for women across the globe. These women have broken stereotypes, as in all the accounts we have seen, and they have, in a way, widened the story or the account of what a woman can achieve. So thank you very much. I also thank all the online participants for being part of this event. We also have a series of upcoming events, so I request our online participants to see our SAARC website, and also we have Facebook account where we post information about the future events. So thank you once again to all the speakers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us, and
thank you.
We learned a lot from each other.
Thank you.
Exactly. So that's how this networking and having this platform where we can have this a meeting ground of women from South Asia.
Yeah. And celebrating all of them together, I think.
Celebrating and honoring, yeah, exactly.
Thank you, all the panelists as well.